I'm Katherine Marchment. I'm appearing on behalf of myself, but I should also say that I started and work with a community organisation called NT Baseline Testing, and we're currently doing baseline testing in the Northern Territory at the Roper River at the moment of water, and I've developed the templates for that and gathered together the scientists and that will back that so that we have accreditation as well. Okay. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Larrakia people on whose land we meet and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I would like to thank the panel for the time and efforts you've put in to produce such a comprehensive report, and especially for the online submission library that members of the public have been able to reference. That's been awesome. Thanks. I just go through a few points. Social impact. In the Northern Territory, we have a small population within a large area of land we call home. The Northern Territory is my home. We're like gas molecules in a bottle which are released into a room. We stretch out to fit the space we're in. Like humans go from a small room to a large room, we stand roughly equidistant from each other, so filling the larger spaces further. We have a small population, but we stretch out to fill a large area of land, and we're adapted to that. For us, a 300-kilometre drive is just down the road. And that's true. Catherine's just like, oh yeah, next town. It's nothing to us and for people from Borroloola or Manningrida, drive 12 hours, it's normal for us, whereas for someone down south, that's a major holiday, right? So I'd just like to make this point that although we're a small population in a large area, we use all of that area. We have our own territories. A pastoralist may own 700 square kilometres of land and live there with his family. An Aboriginal person may have a couple of thousand square kilometres of tribal lands with their family. It's home, and over generations of living there, all that land is walked. All that land is used for both business and pleasure and survival. Everything wild and domestic works together so that everyone is fed. Everything is dependent on each other. I see that we are dependent on each other, both wild and domestic animals. I have lived on communities and out bush. The crows are our watchdogs. They let us know when humans they're not used to are coming into the area. Stuff like that. We know all the territories of the geckos in our houses. Oh yeah, that little baby one sits over there, that's there. We're very integrated into our environment, and we have to be for our survival. So our friends aren't just other human beings. They're our 20 dogs. One dog does the work of 20 men on a cattle station. They're our friends, they're our work partners. The plants tell us what the weather's going to be like. We need that environment. We're part of that environment. And, these gas companies, they plan to cover the land with a massive grid of wells, pipes, roads, compressor stations, processing plants and other infrastructure, as well as man camps for FIFOs. They'll utterly change the environment where people live, as they're not just dependent on current ecosystems, they're part of those ecosystems. The gas industry in the NT threatens our very survival. But what I'd really like to talk about mostly is baseline testing, and I know that has been touched on quite a bit today. My first presentation to the inquiry concentrated on baseline testing, and what has come out of that is a recommendation that baseline assessments be done by an independent body set up by government. Now, there's some problems that I see with this. Baseline assessments are being the assessment of the available data, and it's not the same as baseline testing, which is the collection of data. The inquiry itself has admitted that they're lacking in hard data for a true assessment of risks, especially in respect to water, So, 2. As has been noted by the inquiry, the Government Department of Primary Industries and Resources, that has been charged with regulating the industry is also responsible for promoting the industry, thus a conflict of interest and not independent. 3. Also, gasfield residents in Queensland have not been happy with the so-called independent testing done by DERM and the Gasfields Commission, due to the close working relationships with the industry and the perception that the employees of DERM and bodies such as the CSIRO have been funded by the industry and thus seemingly reluctant to find results that point to the gas industry causing impacts on residents. The most outrageous being the claim that the oily substance found on their cars and water tanks was caused by lerps rather than from condensate from the flaring that was happening right next to them. Also, as I mentioned before, the onus of proof, according to Australian law, is on the landholder, thus meaning that the testing done, if not done or directly commissioned by the landholder, is unlikely to stand up in court. There is a much cheaper, easier solution to the problem that we're currently doing in the Northern Territory through my community organisation, NT-baseline testing, which would satisfy the courts that the testing is landholder initiated, independent and accredited. NT-baseline testing is being done in the Northern Territory. We're doing it on the Roper River, which is landholder initiated, paid for by the landholder, and donations through NT baseline testing. Been having fundraisers for that. As the testing is initiated by the landholder, it passes the requirement that the landholder proves impacts. And they're on site with us while we're doing the testing, make sure we're doing the right thing. And so the field work is actually being sponsored by scientists, and I have a field worker with me, as well as the landholders as witnesses, to make sure that we are doing that field work according to the scientific method that we've been given, which is basically keeping the samples in laboratory condition from collection till it gets to the laboratory. And given the distances here, that's actually quite a process. you know, keeping it within that temperature range that we're told to keep it in, and also the way we collect it, the way it's sampled, all of that. And I have laboratory notes for that, field lab notes for that as well, with witnesses. Accredited labs and scientists, anyway, the testing we have done in the NT has followed the instructions by qualified science to the letter. Thus, in passing the accreditation test, this is very similar to the process that gas and mining companies currently use when doing their testing, where their field workers don't have to be scientists themselves, but have to do the work according to instruction given. Thus, the testing will stand up in court, as well as being accredited and independent. The only problem that we've come across with what we're doing with NT baseline testing is the cost. This is not cheap, okay? It costs for the consulting scientists. It costs money it costs to develop the template for what we're going to test for in the water. It costs money to do the field work. It costs money to keep those samples in laboratory conditions and get them back to the lab in Darwin within the time frame specified. All of this has to be done. It costs time to write up all the notes. So I haven't been pulling a wage for that, but I bloody should, because I put bloody hours and hours into it. Normal wage rates here are $200 a day, but we simply didn't have enough money, so I just couldn't pay myself. I could pay my field worker, I couldn't pay me. So what I recommend is a change in the recommendations, because this work is currently being done, and it can be done under the current system by the landholder simply putting in a receipt of the costs to the Department of Primary Industries and Resources through their current accounts department. And we've also done some testing on an Aboriginal community. Now, they didn't have any money, so that was fully done through fundraising. And the thing with that is, you know, landholders and Aboriginal communities are considering this baseline testing quite urgent. It has been brought up a lot. That's why we're not waiting around for government. We're not waiting around for industry. We're doing it now. So, you know, my suggestion there is that for communities that just simply don't have the cash and can prove that, especially if they're all on bloody Centrelink, is that they put in a quote to DPIR, which pays us to do the testing, and then we just acquit it. Simple operation. It doesn't require the setting up of a whole new department. It doesn't require a whole heap of people coming up down south. I'm working with an extremely good scientist in New South Wales, and, you know, he has been initiating citizen-based science over the last few years. So, you know, we'll be doing bores next using his work. His specialisation is groundwater ecosystems. So we're doing chemical testing of the surface water, but bore water, given the little critters in the water, you know, groundwater ecosystems change the quickest. Living things change the quickest when something is new is introduced into the system. So we've determined that baseline testing of bores using the stegofauna is probably the best way to go, and it doesn't have to be transported live. It's about numbers in the water, so it's very similar field work to the chemical testing that we're already doing. Yeah, we're self-starters here in the NT, and we do want to protect our water. And, you know, I propose that these gas companies know the pollutants that go into the water. They know how it changes. They've been operating in Queensland for long enough to know that. I don't support the speaker from APIA earlier who said that they can do construction and baseline testing at the same time. To me, that doesn't make sense. Like, if we're going to get baselines, then it has to be an uninterrupted with roads. It has to be uninterrupted with construction, uninterrupted with drilling. Otherwise, it's not a baseline. That's a fact. So that statement just simply didn't make sense to me. A baseline is a baseline, as in we get the baselines before we start. I do realise that baseline testing is over a period of time, in that, you know, you can't just take one test and say that's a baseline. You know, so again, our main problems with this is money. You know, so we're staggering it over the year to try and cope with that. But, you know, to get a minimal baseline is like at least 3 tests in the same area. That's like a minimum. Because, you know, 2 points isn't a line, but 3 you can get the baseline. That's basic maths. So this is what we're doing here. So I'm asking the inquiry if they could add that to the recommendations, that rather than, we've already got budgetary problems in the Northern Territory. I don't see how we can afford to set up a whole government department, apart from the fact that there is queries about the close relationship between our government and the gas industry anyway. So it's a bit... All right, so that's where I'm going with that. This is completely different to what I've written down, by the way. But anyway, I'll keep going. Okay, look, when talking about independent bodies, in Queensland, Brian Monk from Kogan could set his bore water on fire. Yet he was told by DOOM, that's the Department of Environment and Resources Management there, the gas field commissions, that his water had no flammable gas in it, and was perfectly safe to drink, even though it burned his grandkids in the bathtub and his cattle wouldn't touch it, and he could set it on fire. So the independent commission that just couldn't find anything wrong with a flammable well that wasn't, according to them, flammable. Was, you know, we have in the Northern Territory, you know, given our, well, basically, you know, have developed a relationship with the Queenslanders as a resource for what's about to hit us. So we've talked to these people and gone, oh my God, really? You know, oh my God, you've got that video on YouTube? Would that happen to you? So, you know, we get that. So, yeah, that one thing I would like set up with DPIR, because we also talk to each other, is that there has been quite a bit of water testing done, especially by the large pastoral companies in the Northern Territory, you know, as well as the stuff that I am doing specifically related to fracking with NT baseline testing. And, you know, we should have an open source database that we can all use, especially if we're doing citizen science. And, you know, the landholders are absolutely essential in this process because they know the best spot to test the river and the rest of it. Ooh, I don't know if I'll go through this next section. It's about my mistrust of the inquiry itself, basically, and I think I'll leave it written rather than putting it on camera because I don't want to be disrespectful, but they are real misgivings. And jump straight to regulatory capture. I've got to say I didn't read the full report and appendixes. I read the summary. You know, the time frame over Christmas, it was just too hard. It was too hard for me to read a 400-page report and do everything that I've been doing. So, you know, forgive me if I put some things in that particular section that you might find offensive, or that I'm wrong. Okay, regulatory capture. During a quick search of Google, I found a number of articles from all over the world, mainly from energy companies with, which cite the need for robust regulation or robust regulatory regime. What I've not found is reference to actual robust regulations where the regulations have been successful in making this industry safe. So for all this talk of robust regulation, to me, is yet more industry spin. Imagine my disappointment to see the inquiry spouting exactly the same line, you know, the robust regulation. I'm kind of like, really? You know, this has been since, you know, 2005. They've been talking about this in the USA, in Europe, in the UK, in the Northern Territory, in Western Australia, in New South Wales, in Queensland. It's all talk and no action, robust regulation. And I don't even know what robust regulation looks like. You know, I really don't. So, you know, as for, like, I mean, it was talked about in New South Wales, the robust regulation thing, and yet, you know, with the regulations in New South Wales, where's the enforcement? Santos was fined only $1,500 for contaminating an aquifer. Contamination that was brought to the attention of the regulator by a local farmer. You know, local farmers that have been locking on and protesting in the Pilliga have been fined more than that. You know, for a huge multinational company to be fined $1,500 for contaminating an aquifer is an insult. I'm sorry. You know, I've put a number of references here that go back to 2012 about, you know, robust regulation, saying, yes, it'll be safe with robust regulation, but, you know, the results show different to me. So I have no trust in that, none. And, you know, there's the regulation, and then there's the ever-growing list of the harm compiled by Pennsylvania resident Jenny Liesk. You know, it's up to 22,144 people with verifiable harm done to them with this industry. This is significant in any population, and very significant given that fracking occurs in the less populated areas of the USA. And this is what we're facing in the NT. It was kind of came up in the last presentation, and like, oh, it doesn't matter if it's not much. But anyway, there's just one thing. There's a well-published Halliburton loophole where Dick Cheney gained an exemption for the industry of the Clean Water Act. This loophole is in 2005. This loophole in the USA is yet to be closed. I have grave concerns about this because Halliburton is one of the biggest, if not our biggest, defence and infrastructure contractors here in the NT. They are also the primary contractor for fracking operations in the NT. Are we prepared to let them poison our water because we think we can't afford to lose their business? There's that side of it too, the pressure that's put on governments to keep the budget balanced. And then, when we got our GST pulled, I found $450 million in this year's budget alone in direct and indirect subsidies to the frackers. How is that? I can't even. Anyway, so, what we were told in Queensland was that shale gas CSG is different to shale gas. We'll be right. That Gasland movie is about shale gas. CSG is a lot safer. And then since the disasters in Queensland, what we're being told in the Northern Territory is, oh, that's CSG in Queensland, that's the bad stuff. This shale stuff is safe. Well, I'll go back to the USA and go, hang on a minute. I remember that line. So I don't believe that this industry is safe at all because they've yet to prove it. They've yet to prove that the risk can be managed. It's all theoretical, robust regulation. We've yet to see it on any continent. Okay, I'll just finish up. And also with regard to regulatory capital, Jeremy Buckingham published an article that made it to the Sydney Morning Herald called The Revolving Door Between Miners and Government, and that included the frackers. And then, our own ex-Chief Minister, Adam Giles, straight after he, got booted out as Chief Minister, went to work for Gina Rinehart. Our trust in government and industry, we think they're in bed too close together. The Northern Territory's current Chief of Staff, Alf Leonardi, is openly pro-fracking. What does that say? Then, the Northern... I could go on, but it's not left. Do you want me to finish now? Because there's...
You have exceeded your allocated 15 minutes, yes, but...
I thought I had a half an hour allocation. Have I only been allocated 15 minutes? Sorry.
My apologies, it is half an hour.
Oh, that's where I started rushing through.
No, my apologies.
All right, well, I'll just...
you've got, on that basis, you've got another 10 minutes, so please.
So I'll just go through to the end. The NT News per the editorial on the 13th of December 2000, and I've got 13, it's actually 2017, it was just last year, so got to correct that mistake. 2017 said, give fracking the green light, openly biased, pro-fracking. Currently, one of their former journalists is in court with them regarding allegations that the Northern Territory News prints as instructed by their biggest advertisers under the guise of reporting, and that some of that reporting has been factually incorrect. In other words, cash for comment. Their biggest advertisers in 2017 have been APIA and the Northern Territory Government. In 2017, this is where I put the budget, approximately $450 million was allocated to industry. This is during the year we have a moratorium on fracking, so they're spending more on the frackers in this year than they spent in the previous 5 years before that, according to the figures from the Australian Institute. And, you know, we've got a massive deficit. Now, I went through that budget with Nicole Madison. I went through that budget line by line to pull that stuff out, you know, because those little bit here, little bit there is hidden everywhere. I tell you, it was quite a process trying to add up all that money and find it everywhere, but that's the rough figure I came to. Finally, I'd like to say that this process, and in particular this submission, has been very difficult for me, given our media's blatant pro-frack bias and the fact that the inquiry is being paid by a government that appears to have a pro-frack bias, with pressure being put on them and by the federal government to pull the trigger. That Malcolm Turnbull said that to Michael Gunner. It's, you know, to go on, it's, you know, it's made me lose faith in the inquiry. A lot of faith in the inquiry's independence, partially due to these things. And I've spoken to a number of people that say, you're going to present, and they go, oh no, it's a waste of time. You know, the result's already been predetermined. So I'm not completely saying that. You have to work within the terms of reference, and quite frankly, I think the terms of reference that you've been given are, you know, the fact, like, you can't, is there any way that you can say, oh, the risks are too high? You know, do you have to go, you know, because it's more like a how can we frack instead of should we frack terms of reference. So, you know, how do you get out of that as panel members? If you go, oh, okay, this is too high, you know, what have you got left? Robust regulation, which, you know, has been the fallback for people, you know, trying to get out of rotten terms of reference since 2013. Anyway, so I might just, you know, I've missed out on a whole lot of things. Look, on a positive note, I'd like to say that I really appreciate the obviously long hours and hard work that has gone into preparing this draft final report that you guys have put in. I really do appreciate that. Especially the fact that you have, you know, basically tried to reach out to as many Territorians as possible so that we can have a say. I appreciate that too. And yeah, I'd like to thank you for listening.
Thank you. And I know you have put a submission in, so thank you very much for that as well.
It's basically this. So
yeah, it's good. I was aware of that, and that's got. I think you said that's you've got.
The submission
references.
includes the internet links.
Good. Okay, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, which makes it a bit easier. And they've come out on my printer in blue and purple, so it's pretty easy to.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. I just wanted to, I guess, make a couple of comments, at the risk of sounding too defensive, but whilst from what I've read in the media, there's certainly been pressure exerted on the Territory government. I can assure you that there has been no pressure whatsoever exerted on this inquiry. We have maintained our independence throughout this process and will continue to do so. In fact, we've had no communications with government along those lines whatsoever, other than through the normal submission process. So we certainly haven't felt any pressure as a result of what may be happening in Canberra.
I may add that that's possibly the media as well. There was a Financial Review article with a picture of you, you know, quoting you as, it was written in a very pro-industry way, and, you know, possibly that could have been a bit of media spin on what your actual comments might have been to the Financial Review.
I've given no separate interview to the Financial Review. I can't comment whether or not the Financial Review has been present at some of the
I have
larger...
that as a link.
No, I'm aware of the article. apart from looking at the photo and thinking, gee, I was a lot thinner then. I haven't, as I said, if the Financial Review has been present during some of the larger media scrums, for want of a better word, so be it, I don't know. But I certainly haven't given any separate interview with the Financial Review, the AFR. So I can't comment on, what they've written, as I said. That's the first thing. The second thing was that, again, I can only reiterate what I've said before, that this result has very much not been predetermined.
Thank you. Just one more thing, and I'd just like to put it as an observation as us as Territorians. We're quite mistrustful of FIFOs. I've had a lot of experience of FIFO workers in town, and they're pretty rude, and they don't have a lot of respect for locals. Had a similar experience in Queensland as well, and it's kind of like we're very parochial here, and we kind of do regard you guys as FIFOs, like you aren't really invested in the Northern Territory. You're not living here. You just
Dr. Ritchie lives here.
True.
Dr. Anderson lives here.
32 years.
And Dr. David Jones has lived here for over 16 years.
Yeah, brilliant. Sorry, so that. That's sort of like, I've got to admit, this is just talking around people around town about this issue. So I'm really glad that I'm incorrect on that point. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Jones, of 16 years of living here, has a question.
I was intrigued to hear about your example of citizen science and how that's being implemented. Could you tell us what you're actually looking for in the water for the baseline assessments? And was I correct in hearing you talk about stygofauna in the water?
Yes, correct. We're actually working with an independent laboratory doing the surface water, and that's basically chemical testing, and I developed the template for that. So what we're testing for is stuff that's very commonly found in the gas fields, and we know what that is, given that, what's been found in the water in Queensland, and the gas company's going, well, it was like that when we got here, because we didn't have baseline, so we went, okay, well, we'll test for that. And, price was a real issue, so I had to chop that down a lot further. And so the essential things are, of course, their target gas, methane. We've tested for that. Heavy metals, because that's come up at very high rates in Queensland. We've tested for that, but also as a bit of a baseline, we've also tested for common minerals that are found in those areas. A lot of the soils in the Northern Territory are very high in iron, that washes into the stream. So we've kind of got so we put in a bit salinity. Very important, because salt is a big problem in the gas fields. The water in the Roper River is actually slightly saline anyway. So what was I had to come up with what was essential and what was affordable. Radionuclides cost an absolute bloody bomb to test. But we did test for radium-226 and 228. It was the most affordable we could, and that is the most common radioactive substance that has increased quite dramatically in the gas fields of Queensland. So, it's basically a basic water test with a couple of added extras according to what has been found in the gas fields. With the stegofauna, I'm working with a scientist in New South Wales who has 30 years experience in that field, and his wife has been training field workers for decades. And so with that specialisation, I thought, well, apart from the chems, given that little critters die very quickly in changes in their environment, we've decided to do more groundwater fauna for the bores.
One of the biggest knowledge gaps in the groundwater dependent ecosystems.
And also he's already done some testing in the Northern Territory, and we can draw on that as well, although it will cost us. You know, he's given me a lot of free time and a lot of free information, but he's made it very clear that, you know, he's going to have to get paid for what he's done, for the help he's given us, for sure.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, Dr. Anderson.
Just one.
32 years.
I'm so glad I'm wrong about this.
Now, I should say there are full CVs, although that may not indicate where people live, but there are full CVs of all of the panel members on the website.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a comment about your fears how development of a gas industry in the NT might completely transform the landscapes.
I've seen it.
What a problem that would be.
I've seen it. Because you've got to remember with me, I've got family in the gas fields, and I remember what that country looked like before there was any gas industry there. And it looks dramatically different now to me.
In Queensland?
In Queensland.
I mean, that fear is a very widespread one, and for good reason. And one of the key objectives in our risk analysis is to ensure that doesn't happen. And I was just wondering whether you've had any experience with the gas fields that already occur in the NT, down south and at Mereenie and Palm Valley.
I have skirted Mereenie. I have used their roads to get to Palm Valley, but I haven't actually been smack in the Mereenie oil fields. I've basically gone from Hermansburg to Palm Valley using the Mereenie roads.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was quite a while ago. My parents were remote area teachers, so we moved around the territory a lot. So that's when they were, you know, working in the southern part of the Northern Territory. Yeah.
Yeah, I just raised that because as an example where I think it doesn't have to lead to a dramatic landscape transformation in the sense we visited Mereenie, and that was one of the things that surprised us actually, how little obvious landscape change.
I guess I'm just going off my experience of the southwest Queensland gas fields where the change in the environment has been massive. Like, it's nothing like what it was before at all. At all. So,
I think that's a fair point, and I suppose just perhaps another observation is that sort of when we did our visit at Mereenie, that is quite an established gas field. So the rehabilitation has occurred, the vegetation has come back. That's not, I'm sure, the case with Queensland, which is a much, a lot of those fields are a lot less mature.
well, also you've got to remember with Mereenie, like when I was last there, they weren't doing slick water hydraulic horizontal fracking at Mereenie. So, when I went through that area, it was conventional gas, which means that there was a whole lot of infrastructure and stuff that comes with unconventional gas that, wasn't there. I'm just like massive holding ponds, and actually that's really a point. I still want to know what's in those ponds. I've asked that every presentation, and I'm asking it again this one. I want to know what's in that pond. I want to know the emissions that are coming off them, and I want to know what may spill into our wetlands. You said you went to Kenya, but you can't have. You must have gone to Ruby Joe. Yeah, like you can't have gone to Kenya.
About Queensland, or
this is when you did your field trip. You can't possibly have gone to Kenya because you went. I know that John Jenkin, met you in Dalby,
yes, right,
right? Which and he lived at that time. He's got out of the gas fields now, thank God. But he lived at that time smack next to Kenya. And like those ponds, you said you hadn't seen a holding pond. Man, those ponds, there's like 4 or 5 ponds next to Kenya that are massive. You can't miss them. And I'm thinking you must have been to a different processing plant, because it doesn't explain it. If you didn't go down that road, you can't have been to Kenya.
We went to a big compressor station, but we saw the big ponds from the air when we were taking off from that area.
We have certainly seen some of the larger ponds, absolutely.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
they're massive.
And they're large.
They're huge.
They're
And
large,
there
they're
is
huge.
like really something not good coming off them. And that, the fact the emissions off those ponds are never mentioned, but they're such a big part of the landscape. And I'm sure, personally, that was contributing to making people sick. It's just, but the thing is, no data, then, and this is how they've gone, oh, well, there's no data on it, so it doesn't exist. And this is how they operate in Queensland. I'm kind of going, we'll get the data then. Get the data. And a bit of water testing of those ponds would be a good thing, I'd reckon. I still reckon that would be a really good thing, to get someone to take some samples and put it through an independent lab as exactly what's in those bloody ponds. Yeah, because...
As I said, at the moment, in the draft final, the recommendation is against ponds. It's towards tanks.
But even so, I still want to know what's in that water. I don't feel comfortable. We've got this water coming up, how to dispose of it, and the rest of it. Don't we want to know what's in it? To me, that makes sense. But
I understand
anyway.
that submission. Any further questions? Well, again, thank you very much, Ms. Marchment, for coming again, doing your detailed presentation again to the inquiry. One of the things that's marked this inquiry is the considerable effort, amazing amount of effort that people have basically undertaken in order to prepare and present to the inquiry, both at the public hearings and also at the community forums as well. It's been one of the fantastic aspects, I think, for us anyway, as a panel of this inquiry, and you are no exception in that regard. So thank you very much.
Look, thank you for listening to me and look through this whole process, and sorry if I'm a bit angry, but, I have an emotional thing about this as well as just studying it. So, yeah, please forgive me for some of my emotional responses.
No need for forgiveness whatsoever. Thank you. And that concludes the public hearings in Darwin. Thank you very much.